Consider this a quick disclaimer of sorts for these episodes. The first 5 episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 I watched back for my original reaction channel. However, because corporations suck, those videos no longer exist. And I do want the content of my reaction and the commentary that I provided in the post-episode discussions to exist somewhere just for posterity's sake, I suppose you can say, because I really did enjoy these episodes. I really did enjoy the kind of in-depth sort of analysis that I tried to do on the characters and what was happening and all that. So yeah, I think I might have made these videos freely available on my Patreon. I can't remember, but regardless, here they are on my reaction watch-along channel for people to enjoy. If they do well enough, I may continue watching season 2 because let me be very clear about this. I did not continue watching season 2 offline past these 5 episodes. I still have not seen the rest of season 2, so please, 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 if you are going to comment, and by all means, please do so, do not say anything relevant to the rest of season 2. Do not spoil anything. I have still only seen the first 5 episodes of season 2, that kind of back to the past school days arc, so do not say anything past that in your comments. But other than that, please do remember to like the video, please comment, subscribe, check out other stuff on the channel, all those good things that you can do to promote engagement and interaction with the channel. But yeah, maybe I'll continue past this arc if these videos perform well on this channel, but otherwise just enjoy these for what they are. Hello and welcome, one and all, to Season 2, Episode 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen. If you don't like negativity, you might want to skip the opening because I'm going to be a bit toxic for a minute. My reaction to last episode didn't perform as well as I'd expected it to in the first day or so, and in part of my efforts to figure out if there was something that I did wrong for the video, I went looking at other reactions. And my word, it seems like the thing that I did wrong was paying attention to the actual anime. I saw so many reactions where the reactors didn't recognize Shoko, Utihime, or Meimei, where they thought that Tengen-sama was some new character being introduced specifically for this arc. I saw reactors surprised to see Geto swallowing and summoning cursed spirits. And then what had to be the biggest kicker of all was getting to the end of the episode, having the Fushiguro name drop happen, and then people be like, who is that? Like, I honestly don't consider myself the best at keeping track of names and shows, and sometimes I'll miss something or forget things that happened earlier on. So, to an extent, I can excuse their behavior, but come on, man, there's gotta be a limit. Like, sure, the girls were kind of minor characters in Season 1. Sure, we never had direct interactions with Tengen in Season 1. Sure, Geto wasn't really front and center as our antagonist fighting people in Season 1. But Fushiguro was one of our main characters in Season 1. I don't know, I'm not looking to like call anybody out or try to flame specific creators or anything like that because that would be very inappropriate and unprofessional in my opinion, but I still found it ridiculously frustrating to see, so I had to say something because it was really bothering me. Alright, and now that rant is over, let's get into the actual episode and have some fun, shall we? If you're watching on Patreon, then regardless of your opinions on toxicity or positivity, you're going to need a countdown, so here it is. 3, 2, 1, go. A tea kettle? Huh? And I can hear wind blowing? What? What's going on? He's making tea? Is this the destroyed apartment? Is this the place that blew up in the last episode? What is happening? Oh god. My word. Is that the guy who Gojo's beating up right now? Oh, we don't even get to see the fight though? Oh, that's unfortunate. I mean, even though we get to see torture is a strong word, but even though we kind of get to see Geto torturing this guy, we didn't get to see that fight either, so that's actually pretty disappointing. We saw this, like we saw the start. I, hes- I hesitate to even say that we saw the start of the fight for those two. We saw like the setup for the fights for those two, and then nothing. That's actually really disappointing. Also, the next time we see this guy, he's at the races. Interesting. Also, I'll be honest, I don't think I noticed that scar on his mouth in episode one. Interesting. I know that we saw very little of this guy in episode one. He just kind of appeared at the very end. Oh, it feels bad to lose at gambling. Sorcerer Killer. Now that's a nickname. Yeah, how's Megami doing? Oh, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. I mean, God, couple things I wanted to comment on. So, first of all, so what I was starting to say is that I know we saw very little of that guy in episode one. He basically just showed up at the end in order to drop the Fushiguro name to catch people's attention, right? Um, but we do see a little bit of him here in the opening, and the impression that I kind of got from him is very much that like I got the impression that he was basically just going to be like a powerhouse antagonist. I mean, look at him. Look at him in that sequence there. Like, you don't strongly emphasize a character's physique like that if their combat prowess is not going to be like at in some capacity like a very strong part of their character, right? I was expecting that like them to be I was expecting their oh my god, I'm tripping over everything I'm trying to say right now. I was expecting their combat ability to be what made them like front and foremost to this arc, but the conversation that we just saw gives the impression of someone who's much more coordinated, someone who's much more willing to sit back and plan and be patient about things. They're both idiots. Incredible. So yeah, that's an interesting side of him to see. Princess Carrie. What? You're a little late on that, love. You have the face of. Oh my god, how rude. Poor Ghetto. And then before I forget, I should mention, try to mention quickly, Bangs guys. What a nickname. The way the way that when asked about Megumi, this new Fushiguro, the way that he like there was a very intentional amount of time and movements made to him like thinking and considering and then being like, who's that? I think that's very interesting. Speaking of interesting, huh? They could not care less. I would have assumed that she had no idea what was going on, to be honest. I figured that I gonna be honest, I figured that they were kind of kidnapping her and then like forcing her into this situation, but she seems very aware of what's going on and seems maybe not necessarily excited at the prospect, but at the very least anticipatory. Hmm. Curious, curious. This is also to talk a bit more about clashes with character expectations from the opening to how we're being introduced to them in the actual show. It gives us a couple of sequences with her like seeming kind of vacant and just sort of like staring off into the distance and in a sense giving us kind of working to solidify the idea that like she's not really her own person. She's just kind of a vessel almost to be used by Tengen Sama. Wow, the way I'm phrasing this sound makes it sound really awful, but I mean, from a perspective, depending on how you look at it, it very much could sound quite awful. So, eh, it is what it is. um, but she seems very much more her own person than I would have expected, I guess. So yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. And I like these differences. And I don't think it's necessarily I don't think that I'm like strongly mistaken in thinking that in having these kind of clashes in the way that I viewed the characters occurring. I do feel like it was somewhat intentional, and I think it's a credit to this show and its complexity. And it's which is, you know, why a lot of people consider Jujutsu Kaisen peak shonen. It's because it does a lot of things a lot better than standard shonen does. And I say that at the end of a long rant where I'm able to just talk over the show because there hasn't been a super ton going on in these past few minutes. I'm sorry, what? He didn't answer. I am loving this character the more conversations we're seeing with him. And then he just kind of casually gives a non-committal answer. He is fascinating. Also, I don't think that's the first time we've heard Limitless, but is that the first time we've heard that Gojo's the first to possess the six eyes and Limitless? I feel like it is. I feel like that's the first time we've heard that specifically. Why? Does not care. Oh, I'm sure that was symbolic in a way that I'm not going to hazard a guess at. Can we see some actual fighting, please? But you're the strongest. That wow, what a backhanded compliment. Oh, we'll see about that. Oh, this poor guy's about to get absolutely wasted. This poor guy is about to get absolutely wasted. Go ahead then, Gramps. Make a move. Jeez. Oh, man. Huh? Huh? I. What just happened? He got genjutsu'd. I do not need this random dude's backstory. Throttled. Oh. Whew. Oh, I see. That's so funny. Audience is sitting here like, what's going on? What's happening? And then the reveal is, oh, I understand. I was seeing my life flash before my eyes. That's real good. That's real good. And what are these two doing? Oops. Incredible. Oh my word. Lady Killer Gojo. Oh my god, it's the audience. They're complimenting his eyelashes. They're asking why his eyes are so blue. It's us. It's me. I'm in the picture. No way. Wow. And he's grabbing the girl and dipping. And away we go. Who are you, bud? Let's see what you got, girl. Oh, her eyes. Oh no, you should beware, bud. Don't underestimate someone with crazy eyes, and this girl has crazy eyes. Thanks, Ghetto. Who's he on the phone with? I figured he was probably talking to Gojo about what he was doing, but um oh, he was calling Gojo. Oh, okay. So this guy's not just a muscle head. Interesting. He might be fun. Oh, son. The fact that she's worth 30 million, I'd say. Oh, jeez. Okay, Gojo. Come on, let's start showing off. Let's see what you can do, buddy. Up she goes. Show off. Achilles and the tortoise? Oh, wait, I actually know what he's talking about. If I get a moment to speak, I'll mention it. Uh, oh, Gojo. My power's really busted, but it's also really annoying to use properly. Okay, Gojo. Hi. Music is really fun, by the way. I think Gojo just murdered a man. Did it not work? It didn't work. It's funny, I was actually going to say that while he still seems stupid powerful right now, I feel like it's kind of hard to explain, but I feel like the visuals that are accompanying him using his power do kind of show, how did that happen? Geto, what are you doing? Uh, I feel like the visuals do kind of indicate that he doesn't have the kind of control at this point in time as he does in the present, you know, back during season 1, which is cool to see. Again, I think it's kind of hard to explain. Yeah, it just the the ways that he's using his power just seem messier. It seems clumsier. Like when he burst through the building, it was like super widespread, and I feel like an older Gojo would either go overboard and basically completely destroy the building, or it would be more precise and there would have been less surrounding damage, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I might be looking into it too much. They could just be, they could just be engaging the environment in ways that make the fight feel more fun. It could just be that simple. But to me, I think there is at least some level of intention with the ways that they are exercising Gojo's power in these fights. Maybe. What are these little post credit things, man? They're so silly. Okay. Okay, so that was episode 2, and I feel like it was a bit of a slow episode. Didn't feel like there was too much that happened. We mostly What I took from it was mostly some further characterization on this Fushiguro character. I don't think we got his first name, but regardless, this Fushiguro that we've met, we got some better characterization on him. And then we got to see a little bit of this Amanai character who's supposed to be assimilated into Tengen-sama. We got to see a bit of her and her life and what she is now having to deal with. And then, of course, we got to see Geto and Gojo protecting her, or at least attempting to protect her through what she is having to deal with. Although the way that the episode ended is quite curious because Geto was with. Hmm. Yeah, I'll be interested to see what exactly happened on their end that allowed this picture to be taken. Assuming it's a real picture, it could be fake. But I think that is probably enough for YouTube. Sorry, you won't get to hear my little mathematics/philosophy lesson that I was referencing earlier, assuming that got left in the YouTube edited version of this. If you want to see the full reaction as well as whatever I'm about to talk about after this version of the video ends, then do feel free to check out the Patreon, linked in the description below, to hear any and all of my ramblings. But regardless of whether I see you there or back here on YouTube for the next episode, until then, take care. Bye-bye. Okay, Patreon, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, nobody is interested in this, but since I mentioned it, I feel like I should elaborate on it at least a little bit. So, what Gojo, I believe, was referring to when he was talking about his abilities, and he mentioned, what was it? He called it Achilles and the tortoise, and then he kind of clarified a little bit when he started talking more about infinity, how the closer you get to me, the smaller the distance becomes, but it never becomes nothing, so you never reach me. Like that is actually like that is something that I've learned about in philosophy. That is something that I've learned about in math. And it's a weird concept. It can be kind of hard to wrap your head around if a very if you have a very standard and very linear way of thinking of things, I guess. Especially on the math side of things. Like if you have a very, I guess, standard or traditional way of viewing mathematics, then trying to understand the concept of it, since it gets very theoretical, uh, probably is just confusing. But essentially, kind of as Gojo described, the idea is that if you are, so say that you're traveling, doesn't matter, a mile, a foot, an inch, doesn't matter. After X amount of time, you will have cut that distance in half. And then after another amount of time, you will have cut that distance in half again. But the idea is essentially you can only keep cutting the amount that the distance you are gaining. You can only keep reducing that by a certain amount. And I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this because this is something that I learned, several years back when I was in college, right? But the idea is that you never actually get to zero. You never actually, because again, if you're just after a certain amount of time, if you're cutting the distance in half, eventually, like, it doesn't matter how small that gets. It gets to, again, it doesn't matter, a mile, a foot, an inch, it gets to half of that, then a quarter, then an eighth, then a 16th, 32, 1 out of 64, and it keeps going like that. It keeps becoming a smaller and smaller fraction or decimal, however you want to think of it, but it never gets to zero. And so yeah, it's interesting, in my opinion, to see him himself express his ability in that way, because yeah, it's kind of like he said something like you should spend more time learning or something like that. Uh and I personally think it's so cool when powers have like some kind of, not necessarily explanation to them, but some kind of grounding in what makes them make sense. You know what I mean? Like, Gojo's limitless power works because of this concept. It's not just like oh, you can't hit me because I'm super cool and powerful and a main character type, and so I can't be beaten by the likes of you. So with that very stupid point out of the way, let's actually talk about the episode a little bit. While I may not fully understand how the maid or attendant, or however you want to refer to her position or title or whatever, while I may not fully understand how we got to a point of her seemingly being captured, I am kind of glad that she is, just because I really want to see more combat. I talked at the very beginning of the episode how I was sort of bummed that we didn't get a fight between Geto and one of the Q members, or Gojo and one of the Q members. Both of those fights that at the end of last episode seemed like they should have been how we picked up this episode just didn't happen. We got to see them at their conclusion. We didn't get to see any stage of the actual fights between them. We then got, later in the episode, some fighting, some combat between the two, and what we saw was cool, but I really want to see more. I really want to get a better grasp on where these characters came from, where they were at this point in time, because I feel like the better we understand how far they've come, the cooler that makes this arc, and the more meaningful and impactful that makes this arc. Again, just to see how far they've come. I feel like, I said in the last episode that I feel like the main purpose of this arc in the series is to show us the divergence in paths that Geto and Gojo took, and how they went from being such great friends to being on very different sides in what could be considered an upcoming war, arguably, considering the scale that Geto is talking about for his stated plans. But I think that seeing the personal development in terms of their power and growth as Jujutsu sorcerers is maybe not as meaningful, but is still a very, if not significant, at the very least, a non-trivial component to this arc, and why it could be considered relevant to show it to us. We know from Jujutsu Kaisen 0 that Geto is very skilled in hand-to-hand combat, and for a second I was actually wondering if he was going to struggle when the old guy burst through the window in order to fight him close up, and I was wondering if there was going to be like some sort of connection that the audience was supposed to make of like, oh, he realized that he was lacking in this area, and so he trained really hard, and that's why he's so good in the more present times. But I was hoping it didn't do that because that would have felt a little weak to me because someone who we again, so we know that Gojo is very strong in the present and right now in the past in this arc. We know that he's very strong. We have this Fushiguro character who, granted, we don't really know what his quote unquote power level is at the moment, but he seems to acknowledge that Gojo is a very strong person to contend with, even at his present level, even in his current state. And Gojo, at this point in time, acknowledges that he, along with Geto, is the strongest. He doesn't say, like, I'm the strongest, and then there's Geto. Right now, while they're still buddy buddy, Gojo says, we're the strongest. That is the proclamation and the declaration that he makes when talking about when talking about the two as a pair. He calls them the strongest, both of them. And so I think it wouldn't have really made sense for Geto to have such a glaring weakness, even though he's not at like his peak right now. Even though he is still a student, even though he's still training and developing his power, I think that it would have been kind of silly to have him just be ineffective in close quarters combat. So I'm glad that the old man burst through the window and then got absolutely pummeled. Speaking of that scene, I guess real quick, something I can mention is that I did really like the humor in this episode. There was some stuff earlier, I think with Fushiguro, that I was laughing at. The scene that I just mentioned, where the old man and his fight with Geto, I talked during the episode about how the way that they did the old man's flashback, and I, like many, were probably sitting there going, what is going on? What am I seeing? Why am I seeing it? I thought it was some sort of illusion technique that Geto was using, perhaps. Maybe one of his cursed spirits was doing it, but no. Then what we find out is that the old man's life was flashing before his eyes because Geto was beating him to death in the real world. And then another scene, again, I mentioned it during the episode, but I love that scene where Gojo bursts in to whisk Amani away, and she's with all the other girls in the music class, and at first they're all just shocked, gasping, who is this? But then it immediately turns into just a swoon fest where all the girls are just falling over themselves, adoring Gojo and how fabulous he is. Even the teacher gets in on it. And I might have found the action and lore and story and stuff like that a bit lacking in this episode, but the humor was pretty on point. Something else that was pretty on point, and again, I talked about this kind of during the episode, but the characterizations, I am loving the developing characterizations of Fushiguro and Amani. Amani, I am interested to see to what extent she's going to develop across this arc and how much of a role she's actually going to play as a person, because I think I commented on this last episode. I wasn't sure to what extent she was going to be an actual character versus just a plot device. Again, because the kind of images that we'd seen of her in the first episode, I think we saw a very brief look at her kind of spacing out almost, lying in a tub. And then what we see of her in the opening, while we see some of her kind of school life stuff, for the most part, what we see of her, the way I perceive it, is her seeming kind of empty almost, her seeming kind of hollow. And so I wasn't sure how much she was actually going to get to be a character. But now that we're actually having her properly introduced to the story, in a sense, this episode, she does seem to have a fairly strong sense of personhood. And I'm just curious to what extent that's actually going to have an effect on the story. She seems to be on board with this whole idea of being assimilated by Tengen, so I don't think she's going to like be an obstacle in that sense, but for all we know, that could just be kind of an outward facade, like a persona that she's putting on in order to not worry people. That's possible, but I don't know how much sense that would really make, considering I don't know that she necessarily has that many people in her life that she would be doing it for. So I don't really know. Maybe she's going to change her mind. I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens with her over the course of this arc. I don't know if this assimilate again, I don't know if this assimilation's actually going to go through because I don't know that they actually succeed in this mission. If they do, I'm wondering if that is in some way going to connect with why Geto becomes the way that he does, and just there's so many ways that things could go. But I think that's enough of a Manai, because regardless of what does eventually happen to her at the end of this arc, I think that the end of this arc is going to be the end of her presence in this series. Whereas Fushiguro, I hope that there's no world in which this guy dies at the end of this arc, because I want to hold out hope that we get to see him in the future, in the present, in the next arc of season 2, because I don't think I can get enough of this guy in the next few episodes. I really don't. I am so curious by the I am made so curious by this character. I feel like he is so interesting, and the things he chooses to care about, the way he chooses to respond to certain things, I feel like he's got so much going on. And like on the surface, all we see is some guy who's presumably somewhat of a deadbeat, just sort of gambling all the time. Like, I very much want to learn more about this guy. I really do. I want to see him fight for sure, but I also just want to learn more about this guy. I want to understand why he is the way that he is. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think that might actually be more or less it for this episode. Again, I feel like while we got some good character stuff and this episode was fun to watch, I don't think it was super big on like lore or story for the most part. And it's also the case, generally speaking, that because this is a flashback arc, while there are definitely threads connecting what's happening in these episodes to what's happening now in the kind of present, the events that we saw in season 1 and presumably what we're going to get back to later in season 2, it is kind of the case that because there is a sort of disconnect, that it can be hard to tie some of what's happening here to any sort of wider story that we might want to be engaging with or talking about. Like, what's happening now has little, if anything, to do with Sukuna, right? I think that, I mean, maybe something will happen later where we are able to reflect back on this and see how it was very relevant. But looking at it right now, like, other than the characters themselves, like, obviously, Gojo, we're seeing what he was like before. Now, Geto, we're seeing what he was like before. And again, mapping that development is cool. But in terms of the story, the narrative of how the actions they're engaging in right now influence other stuff later on, further down the line, the closest connection that I can really see is that, like, this mission is for Tengen-sama, and I believe Geto is the one who provided Mahito and the other curses the information on how to infiltrate Jujutsu High and get past Tengen's barriers to steal the Sukuna fingers and the other cursed objects. They stole like what were they called? The paintings or something. The idols that the enemies that showed up in the last couple episodes of season 1. Y'all know what I mean. If you watch season 1, hopefully you know what I mean. Hopefully you're not like those reactors who don't remember any of the characters from season 1. So yeah, other than that, like minor connection there, for the most part, the the nature of this arc makes it its kind of own story. So there's not too awful much to be extrapolated on other than again just the characters and then the things that are specific to this specific story. So yeah, I think that rather than try to stumble my way through making some further points and tripping over my words and such as I have started to a little bit, I'm just gonna go ahead and call it there, especially my mouth is getting a little dry. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it there. Thank you so much for watching and supporting on Patreon, and until next time, take care. Bye bye.